Well, welcome everyone. We're glad to have you join us for this series as we explore different values from the Faith Values Voters Guide that we're distributing to people, and we hope you'll download. I'll put information about that in the chat box a little bit later. Today we've got Reverend Dr. Andy Burnette with us. For 8 years he's been the lead pastor at Valley Unitarian Universalist congregation, but he's in transition, and we'll hear about some of the new things that he's planning for his life ahead. Welcome, Andy. Glad to have you with us.
Oh, thanks. It's good to be here.
I'm one of the many people who are grieving your moving. We will miss your leadership in our community as well as the leadership that you've provided for your congregation. So thank you for all the good work that you've done.
Well, I've loved and my family's loved being in Phoenix, and I've met so many good people like you, and we've worked side by side for justice and worship together, and I'm going to miss it. I'm definitely going to miss it.
Yeah. What would you name as, I don't know, 2 or 3 of the most significant events or accomplishment of your 8-year term with us?
Well, one of the more public ones was the congregation decided to hang a banner in support of Black Lives Matter several years ago. And we hung it near the street, and it kept getting vandalized. And at one point, another congregation paid to have the banner replaced, and lots of people from the community showed up to bless that banner. And there was something about that day that was helpful to the congregation in seeing that they had a lot of allies in the community, and the message that they hoped was getting out there was getting out there. There are other things that parish ministry, I feel like, is one of the last generalist professions. You have to do a lot of different things. And so some of the processes that I helped sort of implement and streamline at VUU to make worship sort of more focused on spirituality and getting right to it at the beginning of the hour rather than doing lots of announcements, that sort of thing. I'm proud of that too, in a different way. Because that, worship over time changes the community. So, yeah.
You've also been a voice in our community for Red for Ed, and I see your leadership there as being very important.
Yeah, it's been an honor to be invited to be sort of the clergy spokesperson for especially the Invest in Ed ballot initiative, which has been sort of pulled off the ballot once again, but is being appealed, and we're hoping that that'll go through. But to me, Unitarian Universalism, first of all, has connections to the history of public education in the United States. But we talk about every person having inherent worth and value. And I just believe that has to start with our children, and a free and equal public education for every American child. I just think there's not much better that a minister could be up to.
Well, as you know, we're exploring values that are important to us as we go into this election season. So we've asked you to talk about the dignity and rights of LGBTQIA people, but I'd like to start in a more broad perspective. We're using Marshall Gantz's understanding of advocacy stories, the story of self, the story of us, the story of now. And so I'd like to just start more broadly thinking about your spiritual journey. What have been the major influences, the mentors, the events that have been really significant for you in an amazing journey that started out, you were born and raised in Pentecostal church, and how you get from there to Unitarian Universalist must be an amazing story that I've been trying to understand ever since I met you. And so maybe you'll give me those keys.
All right.
So what has been spiritual journey for you?
Yeah, I'm not sure I understand it all myself, but I was born into Holiness Pentecostal family, and my father's a minister in that tradition. And so in that tradition, I guess the most sort of visible characteristic is that the women always wear dresses and they don't cut their hair and they don't wear makeup. And the men always wear long pants, no matter how hot it is. But there's an emphasis on the Holy Spirit. They would say the Holy Ghost, and people being filled with the Holy Ghost with the evidence of speaking in other tongues. And so I grew up in a tongue speaking, shouting church, and watching my dad preach in those churches from time to time. And I was often very proud of him, sitting there in the pew and realizing that these folks in the church had showed up to hear what my dad had to say, and I thought that was pretty cool. And he was funny. He liked to tell stories, and people liked him a lot. So I was proud to be part of that tradition. That was my world. I didn't really know anything else. I didn't understand people who weren't Pentecostal exactly. And then I went to college and was the first person in my family to go to college. And that is I am so grateful to my parents for making those sacrifices, and it changes a person's worldview. So I, at some point in college, began attending this big sort of Christian megachurch with some friends. And I was going on Sunday nights with a family over to Seabury, Kentucky. I went to college in Southern Indiana. And they would drive me down there to Seabury, and they had banjos and dobros and all this great music that I grew up with. And it was like I was in two different worlds. And eventually, I couldn't, eventually I could no longer sort of connect with both the Jesus who preached love across boundaries and the Jesus that the faith I grew up in believed would send you to a fiery hell for not believing in him. I just couldn't reconcile those two views of Jesus, and I chose, I think, the more sort of loving and I would say scriptural, but other people would disagree with me, but more scriptural, I think, Jesus. This more social justice interested Jesus. And so I became a minister. I felt like I had been called to ministry since age 12 at this Holiness Pentecostal youth camp, and prayed until 2 a.m, and this sort of dramatic experience. But I didn't know what to do about that when I was no longer Pentecostal. So I was a journalist for a couple of years, always knew that I was still called to ministry. And after a couple of years being a journalist, I was invited to become a full-time youth minister in the Church of the Nazarene, and took that opportunity. And I liked the Church of the Nazarene because it may sound funny to you, but it was more progressive than the Pentecostals that I grew up with. And they had this clause in their manual that said that they believe in the plenary inspiration of Scripture. In other words, that Scripture contains all things necessary to salvation, but that also leaves the door open for errors in the Bible of number and fact and that sort of thing. And that got me. That's how I viewed the Bible at that time, as a record of God's activity in the world, but also a human document in a lot of ways. After being in the Nazarene Church for 5 or 6 years, I found out that was mainly in the manual, not in the pew. That was, they were pretty fundamentalist where I was, scriptural literalists. And as I finished up seminary and also pastored full time, I came to not just not believe in that God, but to not believe in a prayer answering personal God at all. And I didn't know what God was, but I just couldn't imagine that God was waiting to grant our wishes or heal our bodies. For me, it just left too many questions open. One person is healed, but all it takes is one child to die of cancer to make it really difficult to explain how God intervened. And so I've come to just believe that sometimes those things are better left alone. I don't have to claim to know. I have more questions probably about the supernatural than I have answers. But that didn't fly in the Church of the Nazarene. And so One day when I was serving a congregation in Seymour, Indiana, hometown of John Mellencamp, um, this author, Philip Gulley, came to town, and I asked him for some time to talk to him after his presentation. Now, the funniest thing to me was that he was a Quaker, and his presentation was at the National Guard Armory, which I still give him a hard time about. But he sat down with me. He had written a book on Christian universalism and the idea that there is no hell, that God is love. And I read that and was really taken by it, and felt like that's kind of where I was in my faith journey at that point. And he told me, stay in the Nazarene church as long as you can, and when you no longer can, let's talk. And I started to investigate Unitarian Universalism. It just so happened about when I thought I needed to make the turn, that Phil lives in Danville, Indiana. There was a little UU church in Danville, Indiana, that was on and off looking for a part-time minister. And so they hired me. I was there for 5 years and learned how to be a UU minister. And we'll always be grateful for Phil and for that congregation that sort of took a chance on this guy who was coming from the Church of the Nazarene. And is he trying to save us, or what's he up to, But I learned a lot from them. And, at that point in my faith journey, I was reading things like Richard Dawkins' The God Delusion, and Christopher Hitchens', I can't remember the name of his book, God is Not Good, I think, or God is Not Great. And those were like spiritual reading to me, because I had to deconstruct something. There was a foundation that I had from the Holiness Pentecostal Church that I couldn't build on. Or I could build on parts of it, but not sort of the biggest parts. And so there were these moments when I went to pray for somebody who had stage 4 cancer. And it was very clear to me that she was dying. And my goal there was to pray for peace, to help her have any conversation she wanted to have a good death. Her goal for me was to pray that God would raise her up out of the bed, heal her of the cancer. And on the way home, I pulled my car over the side of the road and cried, because I realized that the God that I believe in and the God that the folks I serve believe in are very different. And that the God that I grew up with was no longer a part of my theology. So it's not easy to go from Holiness Pentecostalism to Unitarian Universalism. But the theology, I think, is the easy part, because it's a period of years, and there are moments that are jarring, but then you settle into a new normal. But the social class difference is still perplexing to me. I mean, going from serving farmers and factory workers to serving professionals and professors and physicians, and it's just a very different sort of thing. And sermons are different, and the spirituality is different. Growing up, we were taught that we were born depraved and only God could save us. And I think a lot of UUs believe that they're born all good, and they're wary that church could pollute them. So I think UUs probably have some work to do there.
So I'm sure you feel that disconnect in culture as you're headed back to be closer to family. And we'll talk more about that a little bit later. But it brings to mind that cultural divide between the people that you come from and the people that you've been serving most recently.
Yeah, and right now that seems to be intensified, and maybe being played upon by politicians, especially the resentment of working class people right now as their jobs go away. I feel like that resentment can get hung on lots of different things, like race, social class, and right now we have leaders, I think, who are more than willing to play on that. And so it's part of the project for me of going home is to really learn how to be with my family on their own, to understand them on their own terms, and not to project onto them what I think they must believe. And I look forward to that, because it's going to be a huge challenge. But living 24-hour drive away from my family has me feeling a little disconnected from that system, and has me surrounded by people who agree with me most of the time. And I just wonder what I'm missing,
Mm.
because I'm not listening to people very often who disagree with me. So I look forward to that part of it.
So, as a UU minister from a Pentecostal holiness background, what do you identify as the most significant gifts that your Pentecostal holiness tradition gave you and that you treasure and hold on to?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is music. I mean, nobody, well, not very many people that who did music in those little Pentecostal churches could read music, but they had a feel for what they wanted to get done. And I sat and watched particularly one guitar player. I would sit right in front of him and watch him on Sundays. And I just learned to love that kind of, almost like a jam kind of session where you just get into it and you're playing off of each other. And even the singers, somebody would say in the key of D, and everybody starts playing in the key of D and they're singing, and it just comes together. And so sometimes I don't understand when, for example, UU musicians are trying to all be on the same sheet of music and sing exactly the note, and I just don't understand that. But so this love of sort of impromptu almost music is one thing. The Pentecostals also take their religion seriously. Uh, they are many things, but they are not hypocrites, I don't think. And I learned to try my best to walk the talk, and if I'm not going to walk the talk, then be quiet. And I learned to take the Bible seriously, which I'm really glad of, because now I see sometimes how a misunderstanding of the Bible is in the background of policy, even in our country, and a misunderstanding of Israel and its future, or what Jesus meant when he said a certain thing, can affects our lawmakers here. And I'm glad I know a little bit about that.
Mm.
And those people too, Doug, they love one another. I mean, they take care of each other, they feed each other. And I think I learned what it really means to be a community from them.
Mhm. One of the things that I've valued most about you is, as a preacher, you're a wonderful preacher. Your sermons are well researched and intellectual, but there's also this deep heart to them as well. Sometimes people are known for being people of the head, and our culture tends to be very head-oriented, intellectual. But you do a better job than most of us sort of connecting head and heart. And I wonder if that heart comes in part from your Pentecostal holiness background.
Yeah, I think so. And being in one of those worship services, it's so there's a song that goes, I'm going to a city 1,500 miles square, and they just sing that over and over. There are very few other lyrics to that song, but that it's not about the words. It's about the almost the mental image that it creates, and the shared image that's present between folks in that service. And for me, it's all about heart and spirit, and it's serious work too. And so I feel like that background, and then the discovery of higher learning and loving the intellectual part of religion, really has informed my perspective and the way I preach and the way I do pastoral care. And I'm grateful for it.
Yeah. Gantz talks about the story of us as well. So who are the people that you look to for inspiration and support and direction? Who are the us in your story?
Yeah, well, the first person would have been my dad. And not just for religion, but also dad was never full-time because those churches can't support a full-time minister. So he worked in the factory, and I worked in the factory with him for a while, and I learned, I mean, for a short while, I learned what hard work is from my dad. I learned the payoff for hard work from my dad. And I, I remember going with him to a union rally or two, and just starting to understand at the edges the politics of what it means to be a blue collar worker. And I learned so much from him. And when I went into ministry, my dad said this thing that sticks with me. He said, ministry is not rocket science. You just have to love people. And I still think that's pretty good. I mean, it can feel like rocket science sometimes, but if you love people, you'll get through it.
Uh-huh.
Other people, Phil Gully, who just became a friend at the right time, and I learned so much from his books, and have enjoyed sort of him being a friend. A national figure is William Barber. I'm just so inspired by Reverend Dr. William Barber and his work on the Poor People's Campaign. And I think that if any religious figure has the power to gather people on a national level right now, at least, I think it's William Barber.
Uh-huh.
And I follow his work and keep him in my prayers. Those are the big ones, probably.
Yeah, I share your admiration, especially for William Barber, who was, by the way, is a disciple pastor, my own tradition, and also graduated from Duke Divinity School.
Wow.
Lots of reasons for supporting him.
He's a great preacher. Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So how about the story of now? The values, your spiritual values that you bring with you from both Pentecostal holiness and Unitarian Universalism in this time as we're making important decisions about democracy and about the future of our planet. What values do you, just one or two values that you claim that are really important for this time that we're living in right now?
Well, I mean, it becomes cliche when you're a Unitarian Universalist, but truly the worth and dignity of every single person. And combined with the UU's fifth principle, the practice of democracy, both in UU congregations and in the world at large. I think we need to work right now hard on preserving everyone's voice, because there are forces that are working to take it away, and to remain in power no matter what. So that's a value that I think is, excuse me, important right now. And the other, I go back and forth. I don't know what's going to happen with, I read an article yesterday that said we're witnessing the fall of a great power in the United States. And I imagine that's probably right. I don't know how long that takes or what it looks like at certain points. So I'm trying to find the balance between the social justice side of me, this side that wants to run out and fight every fight and, stand in front of the doors of power and be arrested, and that side of me, and the side that is influenced by Taoism and certain parts of Jesus' message, which says that however the world is now, the work is to find your place in that and sort of be at peace with knowing who you are and doing work in the world immediately around you. And being more centered. I think there's a place for both of those, and that when people read Taoism and say, well, it could never support social justice, that's not quite right. But we need, I think, more calm, centered workers for social justice who know themselves as well as they know the issues that they're working on.
One of the things that I've heard you say that I've really appreciated has been sort of the motivation for doing social justice work. Is it to be measured by the effectiveness of our efforts? Or is it to be measured by a deeper motivation, because it's right and good, regardless of what the outcome might be at any moment? Could you say something about that?
Yeah, I was in a governance and polity class at Meadville Lombard Seminary a few years ago with a guy who marched with Dr. King and did a lot of work on racism in his time. He was getting ready to retire. And he told us, a classroom full of youngish ministry students, he said, I fought down racism in certain areas in my time. You'll try to push it down in different areas in your time, but it will not go away. And I believe he was right about that. So I used to use these images like Moses at the top of the mountain, and we may not get to the mountain, but I don't know that there is a mountain. And what I am trying to say now is I think we should be faithful. We should know what values we hold most dear. We should know what actions we think are right to take. And then we should be faithful to that no matter what happens, whether it works or not. That's not really the question. Because to me, there are so many social justice folks who burn out. And I think they burn out because we often don't get to see the results of our work in our time. But if we think about faithfulness to our values rather than conquering the hill of racism, then not only I think will we live better lives, but I think we can stay in it longer and be more effective.
Yeah, thank you. That's very wise. So let's turn to the value in the voter's guide that is the reason that we asked you to speak to us today, and that is the dignity of LGBTQIA people. And what's your story there, and what values do you hold on to?
Well, I have a personal story. A couple of years ago, our oldest, Sasha, came out to us as being transgender. And, we're the liberal parents, so we didn't think there would be any problem with this. Well, the more we learned, both from Sasha and just from doing our own research, the more I found that a society that's really, I believe, influenced by misunderstandings of the Bible, or uses misunderstandings in the Bible to bolster their instincts that being transgender is wrong, oppresses these folks, discriminates against them in everything from school and the way they attend school to housing to jobs. Still, in a lot of places, LGBTQ folks can be fired for identifying the way they identify, or for being who they are. They can be kicked out of their homes for being who they are. And I can't see how any Christian could think that is acceptable. And so it's a passion of mine, not just because of Sasha, my daughter, although that certainly has been an impetus, but because of who I understand Jesus to be. This person who said Samaritan lives matter, and he wanted to love across every boundary. I don't see that Jesus in taking away health insurance and jobs and housing. And so I feel called to advocate for that community. And I've been blessed to be a board member until recently for 1 in 10, which is an organization that serves at-risk LGBTQ youth here in the city. In Indiana, some years ago, I was part of Indiana Equality, which kept fighting back these proposals to ban same-gender marriage in the Indiana Constitution. And I've done some other work here too. I was on the Parents Council for Transgender Kids up at Phoenix Children's Hospital. And it was a real blessing to advocate in the hospital for practices that are more welcoming to our kids, to transgender kids. It's been a real a learning experience and a blessing to be able to do that work in the community.
It seems to me like it's a direct outgrowth to the faith principles that you hold, that every person is a person of dignity and worth and beloved of God. And so you can't exclude some people from that and include others.
Yeah, yeah, that's exactly right. And we don't have any trouble finding people to exclude as the human race, I think. There's something about us that wants to be in the in group and have an out group. And so like that professor said years ago, I think we'll always be fighting that in one way or another. But I want to fight it loudly and publicly and be clear about where I stand. And I think it matters when somebody in a minister's collar shows up and does that, because so many LGBTQ plus people have been persecuted by the Christian church in particular. And it's powerful to have people, and folks have come up to me and said, how can you be a minister and be for LGBTQ rights? And I get to explain that although your story is full of pain, and I'm honored to hear that story, there are congregations where you would be welcome. And sometimes folks just don't know that. And it can be healing for me, frankly, and for them.
Mhm. Well, let's turn to, you're headed out of town soon in your little Fiat 500.
Yeah, that's right.
You had a great sermon on that, your last sermon in the pulpit at BUU that I recommend to people. But again, in terms of story, Joseph Campbell wrote a book called The Hero with a Thousand Faces, and he said that no matter what culture you're in, no matter what time, no matter what place, there's a basic outline, a universal outline to the story. There's always a call to adventure. There's a period of testing that you go through. There's someone who comes and brings you unexpected gifts. And then there's the return to community, having been transformed. So say a little bit about those 4 areas. Right now, you know something about the call that is bidding you onward. But speculate then about what you think the test might be, and where do you imagine gifts might come from, and then how will this whole thing transform you in the process?
Well, yeah, the call has been gradual. So when I transferred into the UUA in 2007, I also shopped around for a PhD program because I thought I wanted to teach, but teaching in seminary wasn't quite the right thing. I wanted to teach more formation, spiritual formation, pastoral care. So 10 years ago, I learned about the process I'm about to go into, and I just finally feel like it's the right time. So taking this big adventure, I've never lived on my own, but I'm going to Cleveland by myself. My family's staying here for the school year. I have some friends there and look forward to connecting with them, but I'll be living by myself. And as somebody who loves to strike up conversations with strangers in the grocery store, that's going to be interesting. That'll be one of the challenges for me. I think another challenge is going to be, when you're a parish minister, it kind of doesn't matter what size the congregation is. You get lots of kudos. You preach a good sermon, or you preach a sermon that isn't really all that great, but people still tell you it's good. There'll be less of that, so that'll be an adjustment. And the type of work, I feel so honored to get to work with veterans at the Cleveland Veterans Administration Hospital. But that's going to be a challenge too. It's a population that I haven't worked with, and I'll have to get to know them and their unique concerns. And although I look forward to that, it'll be a challenge.
Mm-hmm.
The gifts, I love that question because when I was first in ministry, I was 22, 23. I always dreaded going to the nursing home. Something about walking in the door there made me really uncomfortable. But by the time I left, those folks had given me a gift. I always felt like I got more out of those visits than they did. I learned about their lives and was just so intrigued to hear. And you know, when you're young, there's a moment when you realize, oh my gosh, these people were my age, you know, 23, 24, and we're doing great things. And so to me, to be invited into someone's story is a gift, and I can't wait for all those patients to offer me that gift. I have in the process of becoming a clinical educator myself, which is what I'm going to do. I have a supervisor who has been a clinical educator for a while, and she, so far, I just really like her. She's going to be so good for me. She's very direct, and I appreciate that. And I just can't wait to learn a ton from her. She's been there for 12 years, maybe, or something like that. So
Mhm.
I know that she'll bring gifts as well.
Good. Well, thank you so much for the interview and sharing your story with us. And I ask blessings on you and your work and your future and your family. Thank you for all you've done in our community, not just at VUU, but wider community and state. We're better people because you've been with us.
Oh, thank you, my friend. I learned a lot from y'all, and going to miss you.
Good. Blessings.